So most people ask me, the first thing they ask me is how what we do is different to anything else that anybody else dealing with anxiety conditions is. And the thing is, ultimately, it is so dramatically different. We've been doing this for 25 years. It hasn't been 5 minutes. We're an educational organization. We're a registered organization. We only employ psychologists and psychotherapists to administer our programs. We run workshops, live residential retreats, online workshops through our webinars, Anxiety Relief Club. We've helped over 390,000 people through those alone since 1997. So we've probably, as an organization, each of us that work within the organization have probably sat in front of more anxious people of all ages than anybody else on the planet. I've personally, since 1997, probably sat literally in front of 4 to 6,000 people a year through the retreats and workshops and through my one-to-one sessions. So the data we've collected over that time not only confirms that the way that I recovered is legitimate and science-based, but also that when those same principles are applied to other people that suffer from anxiety conditions, they recover too. First of all, let me talk about anxiety. The biggest misapprehension about anxiety is that anxiety is an emotion. You talk to any psychologist or psychotherapist or counselor or anybody working in mental health, and they will absolutely confirm and not move away from the fact that from a physiological perspective, anxiety is an emotion. It isn't an emotion. Fear is an emotion. And even that's a dubious comment because I believe that fear is very unlike every other emotion. You think about happiness and sadness and jealousy and all of those emotions we experience every day, and then compare it to fear. Fear sets you up physically to make evasive action or to confront an actual threat. None of the other emotions do that. Take happiness, for example. Happiness is there to give you a physiological experience of joy. And it's also to communicate your joy to other people. So if somebody makes you laugh, you smile, you laugh, they know that they've achieved that, and there's a social interaction. It's a communication device. But fear is very different. Yes, you can look frightened. Yes, that communicates your fear to other people. But actually, what's going on beneath the surface is a whole psychophysiological response to that fear that sets you up in fight or flight using adrenaline and using your body to prepare you to run or to fight a particular threat. So it is if it is an emotion, it's a very different type of emotion. I liken it to the alarm system on a house. It alerts you to actual danger when danger actually happens. Now, when that fear becomes disordered, that's when fear becomes anxiety, and that's when it becomes fear disorder. And again, for many years, anxiety conditions have been known as anxiety disorders. Well, anxiety is disorder. So ultimately, what psychology and psychiatry have done is called it anxiety disorder, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's fear disorder, it's disordered fear. That's what anxiety is. And it can manifest in so many ways. Obviously, my experience from the age of 4 was eating disorder, health anxiety, fear of choking, and that kind of thing. And then it developed into panic disorder, agoraphobia, monophobia, thanatophobia, fear of dying, fear of fainting. Then I developed eating disorders in the true sense, where I was taking laxatives and things like that. So from the age of 4 till I was 26, I probably experienced every form of anxiety condition there is, including pure O, HOCD. And it was overwhelming. And I got to the point where psychiatry and psychology had let me down. Counseling didn't work. Medication didn't work. I tried all the weird and wonderful things. At the time, there weren't things as crazy as tapping, but certainly hypnosis I tried and relaxation and all of that kind of stuff, even hot stones and Reiki and all of that kind of madness. Because people with anxiety, and I know, feel desperate. They just want a solution. They don't care what that solution is. They just want a solution. But again, I think you'll agree with me that for absolutely pretty much every human ill that there is, there's one solution. I'll give you an easy example. If you've cut your skin and you go to a pharmacy and say, look, I've cut my finger, the pharmacist might show you a shelf of product and that product can be billions of dollars, billions of pounds in engineering and research and development. But ultimately, it gives you a number of different options, huge amounts of options to draw the two sides of the cut together: butterfly stitches, obviously things like band-aids and things like that. But then on top of that, you've got things to sterilize it, and you've got things to dress it. But actually, the shelf needs to be no more than 6 inches long. And on it, there needs to be A, something to sterilize the wound; B, something to draw the two sides of the wound together, like steri strips; and then ultimately want something to put over the top to keep the wound dry and clean. From that point on, your body takes over and sends and creates new skin cells in that gap to close the cut. And given time, it will scab over, the scab drops off, and you've got maybe a scar, but certainly a closed cut. The body did all of that itself. And for pretty much most things in life, other than infection and certain types of diseases, the body has a way of repairing itself. Now, fear is an emotion. It isn't an illness, it's an emotion. When it becomes disordered, it still isn't an illness, it's still an emotion. Yes, it's happening when it shouldn't, but it's still an emotion. And just because anxiety gives rise to risk assessments that we perceive as what if thoughts — what if I die? What if I pass out? What if I get contaminated? What if I don't switch the lights on and off? What if I leave home? What if I vomit? What if I'm just thinking of all the examples that I had when I was anxious, of the phobic responses and the questions I asked myself within my anxiety. Just because it gives rise to all of that, and then the physiological responses, the shortness of breath, the racing heart, the dizziness, the lump in your throat, the ringing in your ears, the staring eyes, the wide pupils, the strange feelings in your skin, mouth, nose, wherever they occur. Just because all that stuff happens, people perceive it to be illness. So that's where this whole thing around anxiety disorder came from. And then the subcategories of disorders, just to really rub it in. But it's nonsense. There's one form of fear disorder. You could call it anxiety, or you could call it OCD, because all of it is obsessive, compulsive, and disordered. So in that case, just like with cut skin, there's one problem and there's one solution. It's just that psychology, psychiatry, and medicine do not focus on the actual science of fear, of emotional response, and of the psychophysiology of emotional response. They focus on looking for blame, mostly. How did it happen? When did you first feel anxious? What were you doing at the time? Oh, it was when your granddad died. Let's talk about that. And they get you into a cycle of revisiting the traumatic event until you can no longer think of anything else. Then you get to the point, potentially, and a lot of our clients have said this over the years, where they fear going to therapy sessions or counseling sessions because they feel better when they're not there. Now, everybody knows that, but why is that? But that's because you're reopening old wounds. You're resurrecting old emotional responses. In a brain that's trying to forget to be anxious, you're resurrecting all of that anxious response. So you're perpetuating the fear response, which is perpetuating the disorder. People say, I do relaxation, but I just can't do it. Why? Well, you're supposed to be relaxing when you're fighting a tiger. Of course not. So relaxing is made impossible by the fact that you've got disordered fear. Oh, but I'm not sleeping. I'm having sleep therapy. I'm taking sleeping tablets. Are you meant to be sleeping when you're fighting a tiger? Again, your body is trying to keep you awake, conscious, well, and ultimately give you adrenaline and other hormone responses that make you stronger and faster than you are under normal circumstances. So you shouldn't be sleeping. You shouldn't be being intimate with your partner. You shouldn't be relaxing. You shouldn't be lying on the beach or listening to wave music. You should be fighting the tiger. And I'm using the tiger there obviously as a metaphor for whatever the threat, the perceived threat might be. And then people say, yeah, but Charles, I'm not frightened of anything. I just feel frightened. And that's the point. Anxiety is fake fear. It's false fear. It's disordered fear. There's nothing to be frightened of. And people go, oh, yeah, but there are things to be frightened of. There's COVID and there's illness and there's all of these things. Yes, of course, they're always there. And I face those things every day. And so does Beth, and so do my children. And so do all non-anxious people. But they don't respond with anxiety. They don't have a panic attack because of it. They may respond with appropriate fear, but that appropriate fear then reduces when the threat is gone. In anxiety, the threat is always perceived to be there because that's what fear disorder is. And that's why people suffer. And that's why people can't get rid of it, because everything they try is counterproductive. I'm going to say something really controversial now, and you guys have just got to trust that this is true because I don't have time here to discuss all of the intricacies of these disorders. But you've got to understand that talking is bad. Talking is a mechanism. It's a device that developed through human evolution to enable us to interact. More than that, it is not for. Too much talking gives rise to too much familiarity. Too much talking gives rise to the exchange of too much information. Too much talking can give rise to situations that you'd never wish for. Talking is there to communicate facts. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm cold. It's not there to analyze and to delve deeply into your brain and try and understand the workings of the human mind, or to analyze yourself, or to look back at history, historic events that have happened to you, and in some way dissect them to make sense of them. Your brain and body are set up to move forward in life, not backwards, not to be retrospective. So talking is bad. And the other thing is, thinking is bad. Thinking is a problem-solving device that developed again through human evolution to allow us to take a group of resources in through our senses, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin, decode them, make sense of them, and to come to a conclusion about how to deal with them, how to navigate life, how to avoid danger, how to do all the things that we do as humans. But thinking again is not meant, you're not supposed to sit there and analyze your very existence. We're hunter-gatherers, we're just very simple human beings. We're animals. We're naked apes. We're not meant to be that analytical. Social evolution has pushed us towards that, and it's so counterproductive, but only to those people that have the predisposition to suffering from anxiety. Which brings me to a different point. The only reason somebody suffers from an anxiety condition is because they can. People ask me all the time, psychiatrists, psychologists, even psychiatrists and psychologists and people that work in mental health, that come to our retreats and sit there in front of me for advice, which in itself is shocking, I'm sure you agree, because they should know this, but they don't. And I've sat in the Royal College of Physicians, I've sat in California with doctors and psychologists in study groups, I've been at universities. I have never heard anybody explain anxiety correctly from a psychophysiological perspective. It all becomes very analytical and very theoretical. But psychology and psychiatry is theory, it isn't fact. It shouldn't be used clinically because it isn't based on clinical evidence, science, and testing. If you don't understand the science of anxiety and of fear response and of the emotions, and you don't know how, where, and why they happen, then you shouldn't be helping people. Do you know how many people, how many psychologists I've asked this question? Um, if you're treating people with anxiety conditions, A, you should understand every symptom. B, you should understand why people are experiencing these things. And C, if somebody asks you a particular question, you should have a very fast, no fumble answer. Am I right? Okay. So I've asked psychologists and psychiatrists one question repeatedly. Now, so many people that suffer with anxiety also have panic attacks. So the question I ask is, what is a panic attack? And do you know how many of those psychologists or psychiatrists in 26 years, including my own suffering on top of that, by the way, because I asked them too. At the time, I didn't know the answer myself, but I was asking them, but never got an answer. No, none. I must have asked hundreds and hundreds of psychologists and psychiatrists, what is a panic attack? And I always get the same answer. And so do sufferers. Oh, it's when your heart races, adrenaline's released. It's when you breathe faster. It's when you feel dizzy. It's when you feel faint. It's when you feel like you're dying and you've got pain in your chest and your legs wobble. No, that's a symptom list. That isn't what a panic attack is. That's like saying an asthma attack is when you feel wheezy, or like saying a heart attack is when your chest hurts. Listing symptoms is no help to anybody. What you need, for example, is when somebody comes to me and says, Charles, I've got this lump in my throat. I've been told by the doctor it's probably anxiety, but they're going to give me an investigative. They're going to put an endoscope down my throat just to check. I've had people have surgeries just to check, shockingly, and I said, well, did your psychologist or doctor tell you that potentially it was related to your anxiety? Well, yeah, my psychologist mentioned that other people that they've helped have got this lump in their throat, but that he thought it was best if it gets checked out anyway. Look, I'm not somebody who's going to tell anybody to ignore symptoms of anything ever. But if things are clear-cut anxiety symptoms, and or if you've had some kind of clinical investigation, or somebody's had a look down your throat or put an endoscope down, and they said there's nothing wrong, then chances are there's nothing wrong. But if you've got anxiety in that, chances are it's anxiety related. But most people, most psychologists and psychiatrists haven't got a clue. They don't know what it's called. They don't know why it happens. They have no clue. So when people say to me, psychiatrists included, "Oh, I've got this lump in my throat," and I go, "Oh, globus. What's globus? Globus hystericus. What's that then?" "Oh, it's the lump in the throat." When you're at a funeral or at a wedding, sometimes you get a bit choked, or you're watching Lassie films, and you get that lump in your throat. "Oh yeah, well that's what it is. It's an emotional lump, hence globus hystericus." "Oh right, so it's not harmful then?" No. "Do you know how it happens? Why it happens?" "No." "Do you, Charles?" "Oh, yes." "Why?" "Because I've researched it and I understand it, and I've seen it tens of thousands of times in my clients." So when I tell them what globus hystericus is and why it forms and how it happens and where it came from, oh, now with clients, it's a sense of enlightenment and obviously relief, reassurance, beyond reassurance, to the point where most people I tell go, "Oh my God, really? Is that what it is?" And they never suffer with it again. Globus hystericus is a very simple part of the anxiety response mechanism, to be honest. I mean, it's part of what we are as human, evolved newts. We're evolved other animals, if you like, but we ended up as human. We've just got some of the remnants of that genetic past in our bodies still. And there's a really interesting study called atavism about humans that de-evolve because we're living in too supportive environments. We're not living in caves anymore and hunter gathering. We're living in air conditioned apartments and flying around the world. So there's certain aspects of the human body that is sort of de-evolving. There are kids being born without the ability to grow teeth, for example. And there's even humans that have been born with flaps of skin behind their ears, like girls. Honestly, webbed feet. My nephew, in fact, has webbed toes. It's called atavism. And the thing is, we are all the product of our genetic pasts, because there's me and you, and then there's our parents and our grandparents. And in just 6 or 7 generations, there are probably 40 or 50 people that have fed in genetically to who you are. So if you look back 60 generations, 100 generations, your genetics is the amalgamation, the bringing together of probably millions of humans over history. And did you know that 10% of all humans that ever lived are still alive today? So obviously there was a time when the planet wasn't as populated as it is now. But that doesn't affect what I was saying. But ultimately, you are the genetic product of many, many millions of people, and of different pools of genetic information. So when we were newts and we needed to go in and out of water, so we needed gills so we could go underwater and breathe water in and extract the oxygen. And then obviously we were amphibious, so we come out of the water and then be able to breathe oxygen through the mouth. There was a little tiny muscle in the throat that used to close. In part, it's called the dive reflex. It's part of that sort of drowning prevention mechanism in humans. So when you dive into water today, for example, your body sends a message to your brain to slow your heart rate, so that because your body and brain don't know yet how quickly you're going to be able to get oxygen from the air. So it slows your heart rate so that you use less oxygen when you're underwater. Obviously, then you go up and breathe in and your heart rate goes back to normal, but it's called the dive reflex. And this little muscle tightens as part of the dive reflex. Why? Because when we were newts, when we were breathing air and we suddenly went into water, the last thing you want to do is have the mouth breathe in water when it's supposed to be using the gills. So this muscle would contract to close the airway through the mouth so that it would divert all of the breathing into the gills. Well, we still have that little muscle. We don't use it. It serves no purpose, and it certainly doesn't close off the airways in your throat, but it feels like it might. And that's why people get anxious. It activates them. Oh my God, I've got a lump in my throat. What if I can't breathe? What if I can't swallow? It takes a simple explanation like that sometimes to blow people's minds. Now, I've got those explanations for absolutely everything, whether it's inability to conceive, periods stopping, shortness of breath, ringing in the ears, mouth feeling cavernous. I could probably reel off 1,000 things that people experience, including all of the IBS, ulcerative colitis, myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME, CFS, fibromyalgia. I will give you an explanation of why that happens, because I understand the psychophysiology of the human body and how all of those systems interact to create disorder. And I will then reel off those things to people that ask me, because that creates immediate reassurance and trust. Their fear levels drop. Then they do our program and it completely flattens their anxiety. Why? Because there is no other solution. Because we use the science of human evolution of the development of fear response reflexes and of the human body and intersystemic response to cure through science. Why? Because it's the only way to do it. You can rub a wound all day. It isn't going to heal it. The body does that. Do you see my point? It's like exercise. There's only one process that leads out of the disorder that we call unfitness to fitness. You have to live by the rules. The body made the rules through evolution. You have to follow the rules, and that's what this process does. So if you suffer from an anxiety condition today, any form of anxiety condition, and I'll quickly reel them off so that you know what I'm talking about. So generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, monophobia, emetophobia, health anxiety, eating disorders, hair pulling, self-harm, or any of the conditions dressed up inside of that, like PURO, HOCD, POCD, ROCD, they are all fear disorder. They all conform to the science, the psychophysiology of the creation of the emotions. And therefore, the only way that you can switch them off is to use that science to reverse engineer the solution, do it, and recover. And that's why our efficacy is so far above anybody else's, because we use actual science. Anyway, look, I've waffled on enough. This is the first live I've done on YouTube, and I want to do more. So anybody got any questions, please list them. I'll come back and I'll do some more videos. I just want every sufferer around the world to get this one message. I had the most horrific anxiety, panic, OCD from the age of 4 till I was 26. And in less than 3 days, when I understood the science of my condition, the true science of my condition, and it rolled out in front of me in almost like in a pictorial sense. I saw it. I saw what was happening and I understood it. And I implemented what I knew would reverse engineer that and get myself out of the disorder. In 3 days, I was driving to London on my own. I went from a housebound agoraphobic with most severe OCD, health anxiety, eating disorders. Beth used to have to come home and pick me up in the living room and take me to the toilet to pee, and then drop me back by the television and go back to work. And then when she'd get home at night, I'd often be sat there shaking, not having eaten or done anything, because I was so agoraphobic, I couldn't even leave the room. And I went from that state to driving to London on my own in a car that I borrowed. And I even left my phone at home. That's how fearless I was. In 3 days, it was from the Sunday till the Thursday, I drove to London on my own, and I haven't suffered since. And I'm now 54. Anybody that tells you that anxiety is natural and necessary is an idiot. Anybody that tells you that anxiety conditions can't be cured is an idiot. Anybody that tries to convince you that you're therapy resistant, drug resistant, incurable is an idiot. If you're a human and you've only got one brain, you are curable, quickly so, and you have to take absolute faith in what I'm telling you, because the evidence is there to prove me absolutely right in every way. Lots of love to everybody. Thank you for listening to me. Take care.